Chapter 43. Mary wakes up in time for Warble's history lesson as they pass through Dodge City, Kansas. "This is where the great sport of dodgeball was invented, Mary," Warble informs his wife in his most serious and sober voice. "If dodgeball had been an Olympic sport, and there was no age or weight limit, I could have won a gold for the USA when I was in the 3rd grade. "Yes, dear," Mary answers, and asks if they can stop to eat. After eating their fill of corn dodgers in Dodge City, the McGorkles climb back in their PTC and follow the suggestion of Horace Greeley. Mary, of course, is not a young man, and even in Warble's case, it's a matter of opinion whether 39 is included in the age range considered young. But had Mr. Greeley been alive today, he doubtless would have added, "and young lady," to his famous advice. Eventually, they stop for the night in Longmont, Colorado. The next evening, after getting a late start due to forgetting to set the alarm, they stay in Newcastle, Wyoming. By noon the following day, the McGorkles enter Butte, Montana. Butte is, to put it mildly, an unusual town. It is a mining town. The houses are located on the perimeter of the giant pit. More than once in Butte's history, the houses have had to be torn down and rebuilt further away from the center of the pit as the perimeter has expanded outwards. Driving into the odd little city, Warble gradually gets the feeling that he has traveled back in time. He gets the impression that Butte is stuck in the World War II era. It seems as if all the men in town wear hats, not the cowboy hats that are so common everywhere else in Montana, but the kind of hats that were common in the 1930s and 40s. Warble mentions these impressions to Mary and adds, "It is almost as if we've driven right into a 1940s movie set. The colors don't even look quite right. The hues just don't appear quite natural. Everywhere I look, I can't help but thinking I'm watching a black and white movie that has been, in spots anyway, colorized. Butte's natural state seems to be a black and white one. I wouldn't be surprised to see Ernest Hemingway's character Nick Adams or a Raymond Chandler character, such as one of those hard-boiled detectives played by Humphrey Bogart, come around the corner at any time." "I think you're the one stuck in the past, Warble," Mary replies. "You should update your reading and viewing choices." "And give up Hemingway and Bogart for Henry Porter and Amarillo Powers? No, thank you, ma'am," Warble resolutely objects. "That's Harry Potter and Austin Powers, Warble." "Whatever, whoever. Harry and Henry are really the same name. You know that. Harry Aaron, Henry Truman, etc." Warble conveniently omits mentioning any excuse for the other mix-up. Fearful of getting involved in a more serious time warp, Warble turns the PTC around and heads out of Butte. He had wanted to visit the Evel Knievel Museum there, but the strange nature of the town has him spooked. Warble can't stop thinking about Butte until they reach the towns of Basin, Boulder, Jefferson City, and Montana City. Thinking the latter must be the state capital, Warble takes the exit to that town. It turns out, though, that Montana City is quite possibly the smallest town in the entire state. It seems to consist entirely of just one short and sparsely populated street. Warble stops in front of the general store and goes inside to get directions to East Helena. Warble can scarcely believe his eyes when he enters. Talk about going back in time. Butte was nothing compared to this. The ambiance in the Montana City General Store harkens back more to 1840 than 1940. Warble half expects to see a pickle barrel with a handwritten 5-cent sign on it, card tables with poker games in progress, and perhaps Wyatt Earp or Doc Holliday loitering around somewhere in the vicinity. The old man behind the counter certainly could have stepped right out from a Charles Russell painting of those olden days. And the cash register wouldn't have seemed out of place in the 19th century either. As Warble asks the proprietor for directions to East Helena, it seems as if the old gent answers him from far, far away. It wouldn't shock Warble too much if the man were to just crumble into dust right before his eyes. Nothing of the kind happens, though. It is simply an old store that has not made many concessions to changing technology and tastes over the decades. Within half an hour, the McGorkles have navigated their way into Helena, the actual capital of Montana. turned left on Last Chance Gulch and followed County Y into East Helena. They arrive at the Nastic residence early in the evening, just around supper time. Jim is away on an emergency job, filling in for one of the people on his cleaning crew, who had called in sick at the last minute. Normally, Jim just finds the jobs and manages the business, but when a worker calls in sick or just simply fails to show up, Jim has to do whatever it takes to keep the customer satisfied, which means going out and manning a mop and a pail from time to time. It's a good life, though, all in all. Jim avoids the stresses of the corporate world and earns enough money with his business to provide a comfortable life for himself and his family. Jim's wife, Half-Pint, it turns out that her real name is Melissa, invites them in and says that Jim has told her all about Warble and his high school antics. Warble denies all knowledge of such and claims that he was a model citizen all throughout his school years. Mary has heard plenty of stories herself about Warble in those days, but they have been related to her by Warble himself, and so she doesn't quite know whether to believe them or not. The Nastics' oldest son, Rock, is off skateboarding with some friends, but their younger son, Win, is home. After being introduced to Warble and Mary and being told that Warble is one of his father's old high school buddies, Win wants to know what his father was like in school. Win wants all the ammunition he can get so that any time he asks his father for permission to do something, or is caught doing something of which his father does not approve, he can say, "Why can't I do it? You did." He is a smart kid and will go far in this world. Warble gladly supplies Win with plenty of useful information and even exaggerates a little with regard to Jim's shenanigans, irresponsible pranks, and general lack of interest in anything remotely resembling schoolwork. This makes Win happy, and he returns to the living room to play video games. Since Warble hadn't warned the Nastics of his arrival, they, of course, had no way of knowing he was coming. Nevertheless, Jim is genuinely glad to see Warble there when he arrives home, or at least acts as if he is. "Warble, old buddy, old pal," he says. "Long time no see. How are things? I see you've gotten yourself hitched." The usual conversation between two couples connected by former school friendships on the part of the husbands, but also separated by a decade or more, ensues. The husbands try to recapture the old, easy camaraderie they once enjoyed, and the wives attempt a mutual truce of sorts, as neither one is willing to acquiesce that the other is married to the more dominant male. The result is a politely inquisitive and somewhat disjointed and bland conversation. And so we will not delve further into the events of that night or the following morning, where the same basic pattern is replayed around the breakfast table. That afternoon, though, Warble finds inspiration in a place that is becoming for him somewhat of a breeding ground for ideas and serendipitous meetings. A grocery store. This time, the Safeway on South Davis Street in Helena.